Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of Geometry. It's Mr. Anderson here. We're in section 10.8 today. We're going to talk about some things with equations of circles. Okay, so here we go. First of all, our objectives today, we're going to write the equation of a circle. And secondly, we're going to be able to graph a circle in the coordinate plane. All right, so let's start here. I want to explain on this one a little bit about this. As you can see here, here's the formula for the equation of a circle, and I just want to explain just for a second here something about this. Remember, look at this diagram over here. Here's our circle. Here's the center. And what they're calling the center H and K. Okay, this H and K, it's really just the X and the Y, but it's specifically of the center. Okay, so this H and K is really just another X and another Y. And if you notice, here's another point out on the circle. Remember, we've been talking about the radius of a circle is from the center out to the edge. That's the radius. Okay. And so think about something that we've talked about in the past. Look at these 2 points, and there might be a formula that we've learned in the past that could tell us the distance between the two of these. Remember the distance formula? So let's just remember what that is. If you remember, the distance formula was the square root of y sub 2 minus y sub 1 squared. And actually, I maybe should have written x first, but that's okay. x2 minus x1 squared. Again, doesn't probably matter which way you've written this. I should have written the x's first, but that's okay. And so remember that formula? Well, let's start plugging this in. And actually, I would probably, to match up with our other formula here, I'm gonna when I plug these in, I'm gonna switch the x's and y's. All right, so the distance, before we were just calling this the distance. Well, what's the distance now? We could actually, that's what's the radius, right? So let's think of it this way. If we have the radius, and then we subtract our x's, again, I'm going to do this part first. So it's just going to be what? X minus h. Remember, that's your other x there. Squared plus, and then we're going to subtract the y's. We're going to do that second. Then y minus k. Okay, so we just plug that in the distance formula there, and the only thing that's left, if you notice what we've got here when we just plug this stuff in the distance formula, remember how undoing a square root, you square it to undo that? And so if I were to just then square this, I would have to do the same thing to the other side, make that r squared. And what I come up with here is r squared, and then the square root would cancel the square on this side, and what do we have left? We have x minus h squared plus y minus k squared. And if you notice, look up here, it's basically the same formula there. They wrote r squared second, but if you notice, x minus h squared, x minus h squared, y minus k squared, y minus k squared, and then r squared and r squared. Okay, so that's where this formula comes from. It's really just the distance formula using these points. And remember, the key thing here is, remember, h and k, whenever you see that, that's just an x and a y value, but it's the x and y value of the center point. Okay, so remember that. All right, so let's work through a few problems here. It says, write the equation of a circle with a center at 3, -3, and a radius of 6. Okay, well, remember the kind of our formula there. Remember, it was x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals radius squared. That was the general formula. All we need to do is just plug this stuff in the right spot. So here I've got x minus h. Well, which one's h? H is the x value of the center, so that's going to be 3. What about in the y? Well, we've got here y minus the k. Well, what's the k? Well, the k is -3, so this is something to watch out for. In the formula says minus k, and here k is -3. So remember, I'm not going to do this like this all the time, but just to show you right now, it's kind of like the -3. It's in its own parentheses. You're doing minus a -3 squared. And then the radius was 6, and so this is going to be 6 squared. Now what I would do, we'll just simplify this and then we'll be good, but what I would do is I would just probably jump right to this step when I do this, because here this is the same minus a negative. Remember, minus a negative is the same as plus a positive, so this will just be y plus 3 squared equals 36. That's your equation. Okay, that's the standard equation of a circle. Notice here the circle was 3, -3, and when we put it in the equation, now it's -3 and +3. So the signs change, and the reason why the signs change is because in the formula is a subtraction on each of those. Okay, not too bad, right? Let's look at another one. Now in this case, we've been given a graph of it. So we have to look at the graph and figure out the things we need. Okay, so remember again, we're going to start with it's going to be x minus h. All right, well, which one's h? H is the x value of the center. So if you look over here, you go, well, here's the center. What's the ordered pair there for the center? If we count from 0, it's over 1, 1, 2, 3. So this is the point of 1, 3. So that means the h is 1. All right, so let's plug it in, 1. And then y minus k, well, k, remember, is the y value, which is 3. And then that equals the radius squared. So the radius, it tells us, is 2. If you notice from the center, you just count out 1, 2. That's the radius. And if we do 2 squared, that's 4. So there's our equation. Pretty good, right? Let's look at a few other situations. What about this one? Okay. Whoa. Okay, that's not supposed to happen. All right, so again, remember, I'm just going to rewrite this again. X minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals radius squared. Okay, let's plug the stuff in here. Here we've got the center, and we've got another point here, okay? And so when we plug in the center, that's going to be your h and k. So x minus h, h is 0. Oh, that's interesting. That's a 0 there. And then y minus 3 is the y, so y minus 3. And then, of course, in this case, if you count from here, it just goes up 1, 2, 3. And so our radius is 3, 3 squared. All right, well, and again, you could probably go straight to this next step. You can probably skip this step here. But here's what I wanted to show you on this one. Notice when we have a 0, you know, when you have x minus 0 squared, what happens whenever we have 0? We basically can just and it's being added or subtracted, we can just drop that, because if you have x and you take away 0, it's still x. And so we can just drop that, and what we would say here is we would just say x squared plus y minus 3 squared equals 9. That would be the form of our equation that we would do there. So same thing, if you had 0 as your y value, you would just make it y squared. And so whenever you don't have, whenever you have a number that's 0, I guess I should say, for h, you can just drop that and just call that x squared. Okay? All right, one more here on this, and then we'll move on to something else. All right, write the equation of a circle with a center at -2, 5 and a diameter of 12. Okay, well, let's just start plugging this in, just like we've done before, right? So x minus h, well, h is a -2, so we're going to say, oh, that's going to be plus 2. And then y minus 5 equals the radius squared. Oh, but hold on a second. This told me that we have a diameter. So do not go through this so fast that you forget to look and read the words. This says diameter, and the diameter is 12, and so, but the formula says radius squared. So don't put 12 squared in here. Oops, by the way, I forgot to put squared on this one. Don't put 12 squared. Find the, if the diameter is 12, find the radius. So that means you're just going to cut it in half. That's going to be 6 squared, which is 36. Okay, so not a huge thing. It's not real tough there, but just read the words. If it says diameter, remember it's radius in the formula, so you're going to have to cut that in half. Okay. Now, the second kind of situation we want to look at here is, in this situation, they give us the center, and they say it passes through this other point. Now, I'm going to, in this situation, and it's probably not going to be real difficult here, if you graphed it, it would be very obvious what you needed. But I'm just going to kind of walk you through the whole process. It'll work anytime you have a center and another point. Okay, so, well, if you remember, let's start with this. Let's fill in what we can right now. We've got x minus h. Remember, h is -3, so this is going to be x plus 3 squared, and then y plus 2 squared. All right, so what we need now, the only thing left we need is the radius squared. Well, in this situation, they didn't give us the radius. And so what you can do is this. Now, like I said, in this situation, it's actually not too difficult because you could probably graph this, or if you notice that these are both -2 here for the y's, you could probably easily find the radius, but that's not always going to happen. And so this is the center, and this is a point on the circle. That means the distance between those 2 points is the radius. So we're going to do the distance formula. So here's the distance formula again. Remember, we started out at the beginning with this. Here it is again. So remember the distance, or in this case, if you want to say r for radius, we're going to do what? The second y, or the second x here. So we're going to go 1 minus a -3, which is 1 plus 3. And then the second y, so -2 minus a -2. And we're going to simplify this. So 1 plus 3 is 4. So that's 4 squared. Here, -2 plus 2 is 0. 0 squared is still 0. Oh, that's all gone. And so what ends up happening here is you've got the square root of 4 squared. You could either think of the square root cancels the square, which leaves you with just 4, or you could say, oh, that's really the square root of 16, which just equals 4. So there's our radius. And so then all we have to do is, now that we know the radius, just plug it in over here, 4 squared, which is 16. Okay, makes sense? So if you know the center and a point, you can fill in a lot of the formula, but what you have to do is figure out what the radius is by doing the distance formula with the 2 points. All right, so let's look at this one. So here's the same thing. You have a center point, and it passes through another point. So let's fill in what we can right now. So we've got x minus a -1, so it's going to be x plus 1. And then y, oh, here it is, y minus 0 squared. We're going to say, oh, I don't have a radius, I need a radius, and so let's do the distance formula between these 2 points. So the radius would be what? The square root of 3 minus a -1, so that's 3 plus 1. And then actually, this one's going to work out kind of the same as the other one. And then what we've got here is 0 minus 0. And so what happens, just kind of like on the last one, 0 minus 0, 0, 0 squared is 0. So that all just crosses out, And what we're left with here is 3 plus 1 is 4. 4 squared is 16, so we have the square root of 16, so it's actually the same exact radius again. Yeah, sorry, I didn't notice that when I was picking out these problems. So again, the radius is 4, and so that means you'd plug in here 4 squared. And then let's just simplify this. I just went ahead and wrote this with the 0 in here. So to simplify this down, you're going to have x plus 1 squared plus just y squared. Here's where you get to drop that 0 again, and then this would equal 16 in this case. So, okay, so the distance formula, just remember that distance formula when you work that out. Okay. The last couple of things we're going to do here is we're going to start with the equation, and then we're going to graph the circle. We're going to find the center and the radius and then graph it. Okay, so if you notice, here we go. Here's our equation right here that should look pretty familiar in that form, the way that we've been doing it. And so remember, the h and the k are our center points. So we everything works backwards from what we did before. And so remember, if in the formula, if it's x minus h, remember the minus here is part of the equation. And so just the 2 here is going to be h. So that means that h is 2. And in this part, remember, if you need to, you can rewrite this, but remember how it did before the sign changed? So in order to find the k, remember this is really, you have to think of it as what would it be like if it was minus? It would be y minus a negative 3 squared, right? So that you could pick that negative 3 out as your k. So you don't have to probably go to that extent, but just remember when you pull these two numbers out as your center point, your h and your k, the signs change. So this will be 2, negative 3. So our center here is 2, negative 3. Okay, so I'm going to plot that right here. So here's 2 and negative 3, right? So 2, negative 3 is right there. That's the center. And then what's the radius? Well, remember in the equation, remember this number out here is the radius squared. So 4 is the radius squared, so how do I get back to the radius? I take the square root. So when we're doing the radius would be the square root. Let me write this here. So the radius would be the square root of 4, which would be 2. Okay, so remember when you have that number there, that's not your radius. You have to take the square root of that number. So when I go to graph this, hold on, let me go ahead and highlight all that stuff. When you graph this, and what I would do is from your center point, I would just go up 2, put a dot, 2 to the right, put a dot, 2 down, put a dot, 2 to the left. You know, if you're going up, down, left, right, any of those you can count out easily on this coordinate plane. You can't really count that out easily here, but if you have those 4 points, you can kind of hand draw that in as best as you can. Just don't make fun of me, okay, when I draw this circle, because it might not be very good, but I'm going to try my best here. So, okay, not so great. But when you're drawing with an electronic pen, it's even harder than with a real one. But you get the idea. So the circle would be just drawn kind of around those 4 points. All right, let's take a look at one more. All right, so again, we're going to try to find the center and the radius. So the center. All right, so remember how we did this before. It's in the right form. So we look at this number. This is our h, but the sign gets changed, right? So if it's +1, that means the center point would be, the h would be -1. And here if it's -2, that means the k would be +2. So the center would be just be -1, 2. So here we're going to graph this at -1 and 2. Put a dot there. And then remember, this is your radius squared. So remember the radius. The radius, remember the radius is 9, well, I don't even want to say that. It's the square root of 9. Sorry. I'll get it right eventually here. Remember that this is the r squared is what I'm trying to say. And so you'd have to take the square root of 9 to get the radius, which would be 3. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know if I did a great job with that. All right. So now that I know the radius is 3, just from this center point, go up 3, put a dot, 1, 2, 3 to the right, 1, 2, 3 down, and 1, 2, 3 to the left. And so there's your points there, and then you just try to kind of freehand as best you can, draw a circle around that. It's a little better. So I'm doing that on purpose so you don't feel bad when you draw your circles. But anyway, there's that circle, what it looks like, the center, and the radius. So main thing is just remember that formula for the equation of a circle and how that works with the h and the k and the radius squared. But that's it for today. So appreciate you being with me here today. We'll see you next time, and hopefully we'll have a little fun next time I see you in geometry. This is Mr. Anderson saying bye.